Okay, I'm going to try and explain what I see, because I've been reading this bill for 7 years now, and when I first came to it, it was just a collection of clauses. There were just like all these clauses, and it was really hard to make sense of. Also, because I hadn't read the original South African Schools Act, I hadn't read the Home Education Policy, I hadn't read the Plan for Prevention of Corporal Punishment Protocol. I hadn't read any of those things. Whereas now, after 7 years, I kind of read it like a story, like a novel, and this is what it looks like to me. It looks to me like the DBE is in crisis, right? It's like they've got no money, they've got no capacity, but at the same time, they've got these pressures on them from, for example, the SDGs. This pressure that they have to provide this education, and it has to be quality education, and it has to be free for everybody. So they've got these pressures from outside and beyond, and then they've also got these pressures from inside South Africa, saying, what happened to the Freedom Charter, and where's our amazing educational services? And then you've got like pandemics coming in, and you've got like, oh my gosh, what is this online learning thing? And it's just like really, really hard to keep up. So this is where I see the BELA Bill coming in that the BELA Bill is trying to come up with a solution for this very difficult situation and being able to deliver on a really difficult mandate. And they've basically got two options, right? The option that they are taking with the BELA Bill is the one option, right? That strategy, because the BELA is not just a document, it's not just a collection of clauses, it is locking in a strategy. It's making strategy viable by turning things into laws. And their other option I would call Ubuntu. That's the one they're not yet taking. That's the one that we had a hint at when we looked at, for example, the Freedom Charter and what people started trying to do a little bit with the early days after apartheid with education, and then sort of couldn't quite get the thing clear, so then they shifted strategy and eventually ended up now locking themselves in with BELA. Although luckily BELA is not final yet, so it's not yet locked in. We can still choose Ubuntu instead. Now, why do I say these things are opposites or very different directions of possibility? Let's have a look first at what BELA does, and then we can have a look at what Ubuntu would do. So BELA tries to make budget constraints manageable by cutting things down to size, right? You take your scissors and you say, we can't afford this, we can't afford that, we can't afford the other, we have to rationalize. So for example, you've got your clause 25, which is closing all the little schools, 135 learners for primary, 200 for high school. We can't afford these anymore, right? Then you've also got clause 33. We cannot possibly start overseeing all of these alternatives that are springing up, especially since the pandemic. It's like so many kids are going into environments that, firstly, the world is just innovating, and there's just so many more possibilities. There's pods, there's micro schools, there's this, that, the other, right? There's online schooling, there's all of these things. And this is already a strain. We're already taking strain. Now we have to try and oversee all of this, and it's almost impossible. We can't really manage it, so we're going to make that go away, right? We're going to say, look, we can register what we can register. If you're an independent school that easily fits into what we are doing, we will oversee you, we will register you, it's fine. If you're anywhere outside that bracket in terms of your size or in terms of the way that you do things, we're just not going to deal with you. But we're not allowed to not deal with you. We've got this push to have to deal with you. So the only way we can deal with you is to try and make you go away and not exist. That same thing applies to the homeschooling community. We can only oversee you if you fit what we are doing, because that's what we've got set up, that's what's manageable for us, but we're not allowed to not deal with you. So if you are doing things in a way that we cannot deal with, we have to make you go away, right? So we're starting to cut things down to size and keep them manageable. But there's going to be certain implications to these things, because now also we've got this pressure to put in grade R, because this is like an international standard, and we've also got all the stuff showing that we've got enormous diversity in South Africa in terms of standards of living, and with all of these problems with ESCOM and everything like that, our economy is crashing. So we've got more and more young kids living in poverty. We've got more and more where granny's sitting with like multiple little kids she's trying to look after. And that early childhood development thing is a bit of a problem. So we've got this big pressure to like, no, we have to get grade R happening for everybody, but we don't have the budget for it, right? So now we've got to try and catch up. The toilets were supposed to be solved by 2018, and then that got moved on and on and on. Now it's by 2025 that all of the schools are going to have proper toilets. But how are we ever going to catch up? Because we keep having budget cuts. Now we have to fit in grade R everything, right? So this is becoming quite impossible, and there's like this juggling act going on. It's like, how do we make this manageable while still looking good, right? While still keeping our reputation. And we've got this powerlessness, this kind of desperation happening here, because it's like we know we need to do a thing, we can't do a thing, we can't not do the thing. What do we do about this situation? So we're going to just try and make things work as best we can. Our deliverables here have been set in terms of school attendance, bodies on seats, and for a certain duration, right? R to 12. We want lots of bodies on, well, we can't even say on seats because there's schools without chairs. Bodies inside school gates from grade R to grade 12. And the more of those we can show, then the better we are going to look. And we can say, look at that. We've got more kids than ever before completing all of these years. That we can manage, but we can't manage that the way that we really want to, or the way that we really should. So we have to figure out how we can manage it. How do you get kids to go to a school where there are 50 kids, 60, 70, 80, I think the record's over 100 in one prefab where it's hot and stuffy, and there's one teacher, and the teacher's losing their rag because they've got all these kids to deal with and they're also struggling, and they can't use corporal punishment, right? And they haven't been trained in what else to do because we just don't have the capacity to roll out our plan for prevention of corporal punishment. We don't have the capacity. So how do we get these kids to keep going to this place? Also, when our economy is crashed and they are seeing their older siblings and cousins matriculate and not get work, right? They're even seeing their older peers get out of tertiary training and not get work. So there's on the one hand this very challenging circumstance, there's a lot of misery, and with that misery there's also not much hope, there's not much trust in the system. So we're starting to have more and more dropouts, right? So how are we going to deal with this? Well, we've got to find a way to force them, okay? We have to use force. And this is where it starts dividing really strongly here. Because when a person starts to feel powerless, but they also have this authoritarian mindset and they feel powerless, and the only way they know is force, that's when you start getting bullying, right? So a bully tries to feel stronger by going after the people who are more defenseless, more marginalized, less capable of standing up for themselves, and that gives them a sense of power. So that's the psychological side, and then the practical side is how do you get these kids through the school gates? You don't have a big problem getting through the school gates in the place where those school gates are still good. You have the biggest problem getting through the school gates where you already have a real failure of capacity on the ground. And ironically, that's where it's a little easier to force either compliance or invisibility. okay? Because if you push hard enough, people will either do what you say or they will hide that they are not doing what you say. Either way, they're out of view now, right? So they're no longer causing us a problem. So we're going to raise the sentence for jail for parents to pressure them to get their kids into school, no matter what, even if it means that the kids get up at 3 a.m. because they have to walk 30 kilometers because their small schools have been closed now. And some kids are already doing that even with the small schools open, right? Even if it means getting to the kids there when they haven't had breakfast, when they don't have a school uniform, when they cannot follow what's going on in this classroom, where the teacher cannot possibly give them an individual attention. So we're going to threaten those parents with jail time to get those kids there no matter what. Alternatively, the parents who find it too difficult, the kids who find it too difficult, are going to stop complaining, because then they'll be visible and then they'll be liable for that jail sentence. So they're going to shut up. And they won't be actually agitating anymore, and they won't be making it clear that there is a problem. So for example, when I was on this workshop for the BELA Bill pre-hearings, a man said, please make it clear how they must register for homeschooling, because it's nearly the end of the first term and there's so many in my area that still haven't been placed in school. So the kids are now behind, and even if they get placed now, they're going to struggle. They're not going to manage to catch up. The parents have to be empowered to homeschool them, and they don't have a clue how. And they're also worried they're going to be jailed now because they haven't placed their kids. And the answer to that was very telling. The answer to that from the DBE was, don't worry, they won't be jailed because the DBE hasn't placed them. And here is an email address. Talk to the MEC. Those parents need to email the MEC so the MEC becomes aware of the problem. Let us note, firstly, that implies the MEC is not currently aware of the problem. They have applied for places, they have not been placed, but we will need to take initiative for the MEC to know that there is a problem, The second problem is, the response was not, oh my gosh, you're kidding me. Right, please make sure we're coming to get your contact details now so that we can get the contact details of these parents so that we can make sure this gets resolved. We are all sitting in this room, the people who have responsibility for this, and so we will be able to do this. Now you've alerted us that the MEC is not aware and it's not getting followed. No, that was not the answer. The answer was, you as a private citizen who happens to be sitting here are now tasked at your own cost to make sure that all of these parents get the instruction to contact the MEC. And I know what it's like emailing the DBE. You are lucky if you ever get a response, and there's no proof that you sent your email. So that, I think, is encouraging the thing to be invisible, because these parents are now frightened by this jail sentence and they just will shut up. Right. So there we've got that. Then, when we do manage to get them to comply and we squish them in like little sardines to these places where the teachers are going spare because they don't know what to do to keep these kids okay, right? This is where clause 10 kind of, and clause 2.7 really gave me a big insight into what's actually going on here. So once we've managed this compliance, even with all of these ones who've opted out and become invisible, and that also happens over here with all the homeschoolers who are already under the radar. There's already a huge number of people in South Africa homeschooling, hiding from the government in fear, already before the BELA Bill. So this is going to maximize that, right? So we've gotten rid of all of those extra people, but we've still got far too many for our resources. And we've got to keep them there, and we've got to shut them up. So clause 10, in every summary and memorandum and presentation, the amendments to clause 10 are presented as changes to the wording about where corporal punishment happens and what corporal punishment is. And there is never any mention of the change in sentence. There is a change in sentencing. Now, a law should not be made at random. You do not add or change things at random in a law for fun, because what the heck, because why not, because we're here. If that is how it has been done, we also have an enormous problem that we have to speak about, which means that we have to assume that that sentencing has been changed deliberately. Now, when I spoke to Mr. Ndlebe, he said we should not assume malicious intent. Fair enough. However, I have asked him for 40 minutes what was the reason for the change of the sentence, and I never got an answer. And I also asked at the BELA Bill pre-hearing workshop to the lawyer what was the reason for the sentence changing, and I never got an answer. So I don't have anything other than an assumption that I think that this is to give judges a suggestion that the educators get off lightly because they have no option other than to use the cane, or these days the PVC pipe, the hose pipe, the iron pipe, or the boiling water kettle, right? Because there's no other way they can control this classroom, right? So the implicit message, I was told this doesn't matter because the judge is not bound by the legislation. The judge merely refers to the legislation. However, when the judge refers to the legislation, the judge will see that the suggested sentence is not exceeding 12 months, right? The judge will also say, oh my gosh, but that sounds a little for what I'm seeing in front of me. But then he will go to the definition of corporal punishment, which has now been inserted in the bill, and he'll see that it includes hitting with objects, punching, kicking, pouring boiling water on. All of that is included in this definition of corporal punishment, and the maximum sentence recommended is 12 months, and it could be much worse than it is, so we shouldn't give the maximum sentence. Now there's a precedent. There is a 6-year sentence already in place, partly suspended, a pending repeat offence, but there is a 6-year sentence on the books right now. So this is significant, and I think that it is probably related here to realizing that they can't actually, because there's also a tendency to put these people back into the classroom, right? We keep hearing in the news when there's a case, and then for example, that boiling water teacher recently last year, she was still in the classroom afterwards. She was supposed to be suspended, but she wasn't, because it's difficult when you're dealing with unions and people's livelihoods and the relationships within that community, and you know just the local politics implications, where, for example, you get local police covering up corporal punishment and telling parents that they shouldn't make a fuss and things like this, and principals bribing parents, and you know there's a culture of silence, and this means that only those judges who are pretty hardcore are going to override this, right? We already have under-sentencing happening in corporal punishment cases where parents are incensed that the sentences are so light, and this is basically giving the judges an excuse to keep doing that and even keep going further in that direction, which is helpful when you're trying to deal with this and make it shut up. The other thing that's happening here is clause 2.7 on protests. So this provides that you can be jailed for disrupting school function, right? So you disrupt classes, any kind of official activity, you can be jailed for a year, right? Doesn't have to be violent, just has to interfere with the school functioning. Now, at the workshop, I said, hang on a second, this is a violation of the constitutional right for peaceful protest, and let us also note that all of the international human rights and children's rights documents enshrine this right, and also say that it is educational for children to learn how to do civic protest. It's an important part of their life experience, their educational experience. Now, we've already got, I found news articles where the parents shut down the school because there were so many kids in the classroom, right? The people said, this is not conducive to teaching and learning. We're closing the school until it gets sorted out, right? That makes a lot of noise. The one thing that James and Levy said about clause 10, in a bit of a complaining voice, he says, you're being very loud about it, okay? That was making a lot of noise and being very loud about it, okay? Instead of them being loud about it, they will now have to consider, is it worth going a year to jail, right? They're maybe not going to be so loud about it. This is intimidation, okay? Because the difference between deterrent, a deterrent deters you from committing a crime, from doing something you should not be doing. Intimidation deters you from exercising a right. It is a right to have peaceful protest around something that has not been resolvable in another way. At the very workshop that I went to, I raised this point, and I was told, no, it's not an issue because you can have your peaceful protest. It doesn't interfere with your right. It's only that you mustn't do it in a way that disrupts school functioning. So now you can protest at the school on the weekend when nobody's there. How is that going to change anything? How is that different from sending yet another email? How is that different from complaining yet again to the principal? So I was very taken that the crowd was not letting this go, because I had my turn to ask my question, then it wasn't answered, somebody else pushed back on it, and then in the last round, a man told his own story. He was an SGB member, and he said, we tried, I can't remember, I think he said 2 years to get chairs, and how many emails? I don't remember. He said, the same day we shut down the school until the chairs come, the chairs arrived that afternoon. He said it was the only thing that worked. We have another news article where a boy was kneed in the stomach, shoved up against the wall, kneed in the stomach such that he vomited. And something about that particular incident triggered the kids and the parents. It wasn't new, because there were 2 educators who were routinely punching the kids for things like failing tests. And something about that event, because in that same news article they speak about, I think it's his older brother or one of the older brothers of one of the kids in that class, who already dropped out 3 years previously because of this ongoing problem that wasn't resolvable with this abuse happening from the kids in the school. So that's how long that went on. The parents showed up and protested, and we don't know exactly what happened at that protest. It's he says, she says, but the teachers walked out. At least I think it was 12 teachers walked out, and they didn't come back in solidarity for those 2 teachers who were being that abusive, which makes sense, because those other 12 teachers were like, how are we going to keep control? This is my speculation, sure. How are we going to keep control over our kids? Now we don't have those two terrorizing them, because those 2 are putting the fear of God into all of the kids, so it makes our discipline job easier. If they're leaving, we're not able to be that abusive to kids, but we also don't have any other way to keep control once that's gone. So they all walk out. Now, they stayed away for months and months. I am guessing they must have kept their salaries, surely, I think, because otherwise it would have been a bit radical. But it effectively punished those families and that whole school population, because they no longer had their classes. Their education was neglected. That is very, very messy. If the DBE has to use that kind of tactic, they're going to come under a lot of flack, because they are not allowed to neglect the kids' education. They should have sent replacement teachers immediately instead of letting them sit for months. So this becomes dodgy. So instead we've got this here. Those parents should not protest, get in the way of the school functioning at all. They can go to jail. Now, the result here, if we have a look at what the result is going to be on South African society, we already have enormous numbers of kids being traumatized by violence in the classroom. Now, if you understand psychology at all, you understand that a kid who's traumatized, who does not get healing, is very likely to stay in the cycle of violence, either as a victim or as a perpetrator. We wonder why we've got such enormous levels of GBV and violent crime in South Africa. If you consider that for every kid who gets badly hit, you've got how many kids in that classroom also getting traumatized by being up-close witnesses to that event. You're brutalizing people and their relationship to violence, right? So this is going to get worse, because now that we've closed all these small schools and merged them, right, we've got more kids in the classroom than ever before. Now we've reduced the number of people homeschooling, we've got more than ever before. So it's going to get worse, because we've also got the budget cuts, and the infrastructure that was already falling down is now going to fall down more and more and more. So we're going to get worse and worse and worse. Oh, and this is also where the language clause comes in. Again, laws have to be exact. If that language clause is going to be used to protect mother tongue education, it should say so explicitly. It doesn't say so explicitly. So it could actually be used in either direction. And again, at the pre-hearing workshop, there was a beautiful example where the man said, I can't remember what the languages were. Let's say Sesotho, Sepedi, and isiZulu. He said, there's 3 small schools in my area. They're all too small. They'll have to be merged according to this plan to close the small schools in clause 25. And then which is going to be the language of instruction? Because it won't be possible to do all 3. So 2 of those groups are going to lose their mother tongue education, right? and the HOD now has power from the BELA Bill to do that, because they will need that power to be able to do that in order to be able to accomplish this. Right. So this is the picture that we're looking at, where it's going to be, it's a hope that all of this makes things controllable by cutting them down to size and using authoritarian tactics learned under apartheid. Because, you know, all the people doing these things and making these decisions right now grew up under apartheid. They were brutalized. They learned that the way you solve things is by force. They have had to unlearn this. And how much have they? I know it's not so easy if you don't have therapy and support and so on. You retain these unconscious attitudes and you see them as the right thing to do because that was what was done to you. So this transformation hasn't happened here, and this is the modus operating, the kind of the tools of choice now. And that's the map that lets us see what's going on in the BELA Bill. So I'm nearly finished now. So the alternative is Ubuntu. Because all of this comes from putting pressure onto somebody who's been put in an authority position to do the impossible on their own, without help. And they have to manage it, and they have to save face and all of the rest. The moment that you bring in collaboration and community, and let's solve this together, and you bring in small is beautiful, and you bring in grassroots, and you bring in things like the Children's Parliament model from India, right? Where the kids actually become empowered to help solve the things on the ground in their environment. Why should the DBE on their own be trying to centrally provide toilets, right? If it's not viable. Yes, if it's viable, it's absolutely their obligation. When it stops being viable, we need to be able to go to Ubuntu. There are unemployed parents sitting there with nothing to do. Quite a few of them have got the skills to build the toilets, right? If we can be more flexible and more inclusive, we can probably get enough funds for the parts without the labor and without having to import people to do the labor on their trucks, because people care about their own kids. They'd rather have their kids not drown in a pit toilet. They're going to rock up on Saturday to help the work crew, okay? But then you have to have an attitude of inclusion. You can't have, oh, DB is using me for free as a slave now, right? Because then there's an antagonistic relationship already there that's been fostered by all of this authoritarian control stuff. You actually have to have, you know, that nice, like, we are all one thing going on. You don't have to shut these little schools. The communities can take them over. You don't have to shut down the homeschool. In fact, you should be empowering the homeschoolers to teach each other and support each other in best practice, so that you get best practice homeschooling instead of people not knowing how to do it and messing it up, right? So you can leverage this this kind of spirit. South Africa's got amazing resilience, amazing people. And so many people now are literate. We're not living in apartheid anymore, where we had enormous rates of illiteracy. There's lots of people who can actually support a lot of the kids. We can, instead of using our transport resources to ship kids far away to a building they don't want to be at, where maybe they can't even see their parents anymore because now they have to live like away from home to reach there every day. You know, we could use that money to, for example, set up Wi-Fi, internet, that we could, you know, sort of run more support services over virtual means, so that people who don't really have the capacity to know what to do can be supported in supporting the kids. There's just so many ways this can happen. And we've got so many experts in South Africa, amazing people, who can inform this kind of thing. If you look at Mariette Kruger, Reyneke, I mean, these are just two academics I'm speaking off the top of my head, Matabo Base. These are just three academics I'm speaking off right the top of my head that can really inform this. And then we've also got international precedents we can draw on. So many. This is doable. This is viable. But in order to do this, we have to let go of this bully attitude. We cannot anymore have a bully bill, because the bully bill just keeps going down and down and down and down the spiral. I don't see how you turn it around, because it locks things in. And law amendments don't, I mean, this one took more than 7 years. I've just been working on it for 7 years, but I think they started it in 2014, which means 10 years. So this is going to be in place for a while if this gets passed. And then what incentive is there to change this? The only incentive is that things collapse more and more and more and more. How is that in the best interest of the child, to let things collapse more and more? This is in the best interest of the child, and we should be going there yesterday. That's my thought. Now, all love to everybody involved in this, because it's not easy. But, you know, this is our hope. Can you imagine what South Africa looks like when we go here? Isn't this the Freedom Charter? Isn't this what we actually fought for? Isn't this why we ended apartheid? I'll stop there.